Okay, it's good to see everyone. It's a pleasure to have with us tonight Mark Trencher. Mark is the founder of Nishma Research, which is a firm that conducts Jewish communal and organizational studies. So Nishma's goal is to provide the Jewish community with quality, affordable, needed, independent research. And since its founding in 2015, it's conducted 6 major studies. Over 12,000 people have shared their thoughts on Jewish issues with Mark and his researchers. This includes surveys that looked at across at various congregations, as well as in-depth surveys of particular congregations. Before starting Nishma, Mark worked in assorted executive positions in the financial world in the areas of market research, financial forecasting, operations research, and public policy. He hails originally from New York City. He's a fellow New Yorker, currently living in West Hartford with his wife, Sandy. They have 3 children and 9 grandchildren. And Mazel Tov, I know the oldest of whom recently got married. And you drove cross country, I think, to attend the wedding in a COVID compliant manner. So Mark, I'll go ahead and unmute you. Let me just find you. And that work. Okay, great.
Very good.
So Mark, if you could just begin by telling us a little bit about how you do your research, how do you formulate your questions, how do you sort of validate your research, how do you know it's accurate? Could you just give us a little bit of background about that?
Sure. So as Rabbi mentioned, I've started this research from 5 years ago. My business career was in research, and I decided to kind of bring to the Jewish world the kind of research I've done in the business world. So a couple of things. First of all, what are the topics we select? And to be honest, the topics we select are topics that I have found interesting personally. So we've done surveys of people who've left Orthodoxy, what they call off the derech. That intrigued me because at the time I started my firm, I had read a number of books written by people who had had that personal experience. In 2017, I had just finished reading the Pew survey, which is a broad profile of the American Jewish community. However, it really, if you recognize that Orthodoxy is only about 11% of the total Jewish population, it doesn't surprise you that surveys like Pew's address a whole bunch of issues, but they don't address really the issues of interest to Orthodox Jews. So Pew asks questions like, do you belong to a Jewish community center? That's a good question. Do you send your children to a Jewish camp? They will even ask questions like, do you have a Christmas tree in your home? Which might sound like an odd question, but remember, they're measuring connection of the broad Jewish community to their Jewishness. They don't ask questions about the cost of Orthodox day schools, for example. They don't ask questions. There's a whole bunch of questions that really resonate with us that they don't ask. So in answer to your question of how do we decide what to ask, the topics are topics that intrigue me. We've also did the first survey ever done, surprisingly, of Ba'alei Teshuvah, people who grew up not observant and became observant. Why? What was their experience? What spurred them? We did a survey of how modern Orthodox Jews interact with society, with secular society, which can be challenging. Secular society has values very different from those of traditional Judaism. Are there challenges? Are there benefits? This year we did a survey on political views, and we did a survey recently on the coronavirus. For every survey that we do, although I kind of picked the topic, I'm smart enough to know that I don't know all the questions to ask. So over the surveys, I've assembled an advisory group. Right now I have 32 people in the Jewish community, modern Orthodox, some to the right, some to the left, rabbis, lay people, researchers, people who are in education. And their job basically is I assemble this group and say, what do you want to know? What are the questions that intrigue you? And we go through a process of putting together a questionnaire. We've done that for pretty much every survey we've done. It's been a wonderful process because we really are reaching out. So when I say when you read my summary and you talked about to provide our community with research that is needed and independent. Needed because these are the questions people want to know the answers to. What should be the role of women in modern Orthodoxy? I'm using that as an example because that's a question that everyone talked about and no one was really willing to ask it in a publicly fielded survey. There was even one, I heard from several shuls that were unwilling to circulate the survey because we asked the question about should women be eligible to be the president of your synagogue. My Young Israel, by the way, is, I believe, the only one ever to have had 3 consecutive women presidents. So I'm kind of proud of that. We also talked about independent research. And it's independent because, again, the communal organizations are kind of reluctant to probe the questions we probe. So you asked about the quality of the research. It is very challenging to do research in the Jewish world. If I worked for Procter & Gamble and I wanted to do a survey on people who buy soap, I could do it in 1 day. I could call up a company and say, do you have a list of people that have signed up to answer surveys about home healthcare products? And they say, absolutely. For 40 cents a name, I can give you 10,000 names and you'll get 3,000 responses and you can send the survey out tonight. No such resource exists in the Jewish world. It's very hard to do research. It is very hard. I think I've hit on a reasonably good way to do the research, and that is, to our great fortune, a number of big rabbinic organizations are interested enough in research so that when I send an announcement to the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, they are willing to send that to all of their 900 rabbis. And many of them send it out to their communities. That's also true to some extent of the National Council of Young Israel, the IRF, the International Rabbinic Fellowship. They've all been very helpful. That's why when I did the survey in 2017 of the American Modern Orthodox community, I was able to get over 6,000 responses, which blows people away. But I think that also shows that people are really eager to share their thinking and their views. Is the survey quality research? I will only say that the statistical analysis is done in a high quality way. I've got a background in statistics. I taught it at the college level. We always test our surveys in advance with people to make sure that they work. But the question people ask is, are we getting responses from a representative sample? In other words, when we get 6,000 responses, how do we know that really is the community? How do we know that it isn't kind of tilted one way or the other? So I will admit, and I can show you some of the data. I will admit that I do think that there is a bias to the left, which means that when I get 1,000 responses, I do think people left of center in terms of liberal ideology do tend to be more willing to answer surveys about their Jewish beliefs and practices and views than people to the right. I can't quantify the extent of it, so I try not to say this is the community. What I say is this represents the 6,000 respondents to our survey. I don't remember what other questions you asked. I think I covered most of them.
I think you did. I think you covered most of them. So let's jump in. I know you mentioned that the way you gather your data, you get people to fill out surveys, is by going through rabbinic association. So my next question was going to be, how do you define modern Orthodoxy? What makes someone part of this community? And I know you touched on that. If you could maybe in broad terms also just touch on who makes up the modern Orthodox community today, size-wise, how big are we? Where do we tend to live? Where do we send our kids to school? And what is our observance level look like?
Okay, it's a lot of questions. So first of all, defining it. Yeah, so it used to be 30 years ago, if you asked somebody, are you modern Orthodox? They would say yes or they would say no. The Orthodox world is made up of two big groups, modern Orthodox. I put a lamp there. Modern Orthodox and ultra, okay, they're called modern Orthodox and ultra Orthodox. Now we use the term modern Orthodox and Haredi to reflect. And the second group includes Hasidic and Yeshivish. Those are the groups that don't really like to interact with secular society. They'll do it if they have to. And then you have the modern Orthodox, and the philosophy of modern Orthodox is unique in the Jewish world. And that is that we actually interact with secular society. It's called Torah Umada, or it's called Torah Im Derech Eretz. It basically means that we meld our Torah views, our Orthodox views, our religious views with full participation in secular society, science, philosophy, culture, and we go to the experts in the field, whether it's doctors or lawyers, a priori. So that's unique. The term modern Orthodox, starting maybe about 20 years ago, people said, you know, I have problems with the term. That might be why Rabbi Lamb at Yeshiva University said he coined the term centrist Orthodox. Those two terms are both used, modern, centrist. But just to understand, that's the broad group that we're talking about. How many are there? There are. Okay, so actually, I'm glad you asked that question, because I do have a few slides that I can share with you if you want me to. Most of my talks are on Shabbos, on Shabbat, and I find that just talking like this face to face is actually a lot more fun and a lot more entertaining and engaging than showing slides. In the business world, we showed slides all the time, and somebody would put up a slide and they'd say, "Oh, I apologize that you can't read this," and I would always say, "Well, why are you showing it to me?" But I think this one we can. Are you disabled screen sharing?
Oh,
I think maybe I did. That's okay. I don't need to do it, but I will if you. Okay. So in terms of, so the total American Jewish population is 7 million. Of those
Mark,
7 million.
Share it now if you want to. I just enabled it.
Of those 7 million, there are only 300,000 modern Orthodox Jews. 300,000. 4%. We're the smallest measurable group with the smallest distinct denomination in all of American Judaism. There's 300,000 who call themselves modern, centrist. Some call themselves open Orthodox, which I meld with liberal modern Orthodox. That would be the liberal wing of modern Orthodoxy. But within that broad, I call it a tiny big tent, because modern Orthodoxy is a big tent, open Orthodox, liberal, centrist, and more right-leaning, but it's very small in size. For comparison, while there are 300,000 modern Orthodox, there are 550,000 Haredi, which is the Hasidic and the Yeshivish. In terms of where, so just so you know, there's many more. We are a minority within the Orthodox, and the Orthodox are very much a minority within Judaism. They do live in certain specific places. If you're Yeshivish, which is called Yeshivish or Aguda or Litvish, they always live near their yeshiva. So for example, there's the largest yeshiva center of Torah learning in America is in Lakewood, New Jersey, and therefore that is a very large yeshivish community. Another large one is in Baltimore, near Israel, so that's a very large yeshivish community. You have the same thing in places like Passaic, New Jersey. So the Yeshivish, they do live in certain areas around the yeshiva. The Hasidic live around their Rebbe. So if you're Lubavitch, Chabad, you live in Crown Heights. Now there are exceptions, there are other communities. If you're Satmar, which is the largest Hasidic group, you live largely in Williamsburg and some in upstate New York, just north of Rockland County. Modern Orthodox are a little bit more geographically spread. We do live mainly in the Northeast, a lot in the New York City and northern New Jersey area, a very high percentage. But you find the modern Orthodox in pretty much every city. There's a book called The American Jewish Yearbook, which is a list of every community. So I think it's safe to say that the 300,000 modern Orthodox are actually spread out a little bit more than the other groups. The other questions you asked are about days. You asked about day schools. Yes, the modern Orthodox do largely send their kids to day schools. We get a number of about 85%, not 100%, about 85% send their children to an Orthodox Jewish school, and another 7 or 8% send them to a Jewish community school. But we are very vested in our schools. What other questions did you ask me?
The other question I asked there was about our level of observance, because it's
okay. So our level of observance. So this is interesting. So the Pew survey did ask questions about observance. A few. They asked quite a few questions. We asked a few questions. We asked people about their beliefs. We asked them, do you believe in God? Do you believe that God created the world? Do you believe that God is involved in our day-to-day lives, the minutiae of our lives? Do you believe that God cares about you? Do you believe that God loves you? It's kind of an interesting continuum of questions. And the percentages range from 90% down to 75%. So somebody says to me, you know, if 90% of modern Orthodox Jews believe in God and 10% don't, that's kind of strange. What makes those 10% modern Orthodox? And the answer I give is always the same. We ask people to define themselves. We ask them, are you Orthodox? Are you Jewish? Yes. Are you Orthodox, conservative, reform, renewal, reconstruction, other? They all said, yes, I am Orthodox. And then we asked them, okay, are you modern or centrist? Hasidic, including Lubavitch, yeshivish, or other? And they all said, I am modern or centrist. So why someone who doesn't fully believe in God would say that? You know, we can explore that. There are people who are culturally Orthodox. So in other words, the point I came up with was that we definitely, one size does not fit all in terms of beliefs and also in terms of practices. So when we ask people about kosher and about Shabbat, you also end up with percentages in the 95 down to 80% range, say that they're fully compliant. So in general, modern Orthodox Jews have fairly high levels of traditional belief, not 100%, more like 80 to 90. They have fairly high levels of compliance with the basic elements of halacha, Shabbat, kashrut. In terms of taharat and mishpacha, the laws of family purity, it gets down to about 60 to 65%. In all of those cases, the numbers are higher among the Haredi, okay, not surprisingly, but these are all people who define themselves as Orthodox. And one question we asked was particularly interesting, so I wanted to find out, how important is your orthodoxy to you? So the question I wanted to ask people originally was, okay, so you told us that you're modern or centrist Orthodox. I want to figure out how important that is to you as a part of your life. And I want you to think about yourself. Think about all the things that make you who you are. So you, for example, might be a husband or a wife. You might be a parent, a grandparent, a child, a grandchild. You might be a rabbi, a doctor who heals people, a lawyer who fixes people's problems. You might view yourself as just a Jew or an American citizen or a person who cares about the world and climate and where society is going. Think about all the things that make you who you are. And now, within that spectrum of persona, the things that make you who you are, how important is your Jewishness to you? So one of the things that we get taught when we do research is if you ask a question that's super complicated, you often don't get results that are really helpful. People get confused by it. So although that was a really interesting question, we asked a different question. In the end, we asked the question, I'm going to give you a sentence. Being an Orthodox observant Jew is an important part of my life. Do you agree with that? On a scale from 0 to 10. So 0 means nope, I don't agree at all. And 10 means fully. Being an Orthodox observant Jew is really an important part of my life. And I was just curious to see how people would respond. So the good news is that 3/4 of all modern centrist Orthodox Jews gave it a rating of 9 or 10. In the business world, 9 or 10 are considered people with a very strong attachment. How satisfied are you with the service? 9 or 10. Some people don't like giving 10s. So ratings of 9 or 10 are very, very, very high. So 75% said a 9 or 10. These are people who are very connected to their Judaism. In the business world, if you ask a question like that, people will say 8 or 7. So you might think 8 is a pretty good rating, but you know what? It's kind of an in-between. It's been found in research that ratings of 8 or 7 are good, but so-so. So about another 18% said, yeah, my Judaism is important to me, but it's not like the most important thing in my life. And if you go down below that, the people who said it's a 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, that was about 10%. In the business world, those ratings are from customers. If you ask that of a customer, your expectation would be that you would lose them as a customer. So when people say to me, what's the risk of people leaving modern Orthodoxy, going, as the term is sometimes used, off the derech, which means they've gone off the path, which is kind of a presumptuous term, but we can talk about that later. But what percent of people might leave? I say, we really don't know. People speculate, but if you ask me for a number, I would say it's maybe in the 10% range, because in general, modern Orthodox Jews are very connected. Their Judaism is an important part of their life. The only other thing I'd say on that is that there was an article in the Forward, which is a newspaper you might be familiar with, about 3 years ago, and the title was "Modern Orthodox Women Are Checking Out." Checking out meaning that they're losing interest, they're losing their enthusiasm, losing their connection. In this question that I asked, the rating by men and women were identical. Men and women both really are strongly connected to their Judaism. Maybe for different reasons and maybe in different ways, but they're strongly connected.
So there's a lot there that I want to follow up on.
Okay.
But just to begin, now that you've sort of painted a picture for us of what the modern Orthodox community looks like today and how people feel about being modern Orthodox, do you have a sense of how that's different, say, than it was 50 years ago or 30 years ago?
So 50 years ago, I can talk about 50 years ago, given my age. 50 years ago, I would say that modern Orthodox Jews were either people who had survived the Holocaust and had come to the United States, and a fair number of young Americans who kept their Judaism despite the fact that most people had not. It was a much smaller community. It was a less vibrant community. There was much less learning going on. The Hasidic influx, which actually started 64 years ago, so in large scale. So there was some of that, but it was a much smaller community. And it was not homogeneous, as I mentioned. If you go back 30 years, that's around the time that people were changing their minds. So if you go back to the 80s, 60s, and 70s, the general view was that modern Orthodoxy was doomed. It was not vibrant, it was shrinking. Basically, it was going to be totally, it was going to kind of whittle away to barely nothing. If you go back to about 30 years, people definitely said, you know what, modern Orthodoxy really is much stronger now in 1980, 1990. There was a huge growth in Torah learning. The community was stronger. The Baal Teshuvah movement of people joining modern Orthodoxy had started and was going strong. I will tell you that the community was politically moderate to Democrat, mainly, which is very different. It's very different today. I'll talk about, if you want to know, I can talk about it. We did some research on the politics of modern Orthodox versus Haredi. So the politics have changed in the last 10, 15 years. But clearly the community has grown in leaps and bounds. And it's a very different world now. Today, I mentioned the Baalei Teshuvah because when we did a survey of them, one of the questions we asked them was, are there things from your prior life before you became Orthodox observant that you have retained, that you've kept with you, that are different from what you experience in your Orthodox community? And the number one thing people said was, yeah, I've kept more moderate to liberal political views and more liberal social views. So when you realize that 40% of all current American modern Orthodox Jews are Baalei Tshuva, and that's a number that we found, and that's also a number that Pew found. And if you think that's high, it is high. But if you think that so many of these people are Baalei Tshuva, and they're bringing in an influx of more liberal views, you can kind of get a sense of where some of that is coming from. Clearly, 30 years ago was before you had the influence of people like Rabbi Avi Weiss at Yeshiva and Yeshiva Chovei Torah, who have kind of given a home to more liberal ideology. There's a group called Porat. Are you familiar with Porat?
Also part of Rabbi Weiss's sort of network.
Yeah, I'm on the board of Porat. That's kind of it's kind of part of that organization. So one thing is for sure, the modern Orthodox community continues to evolve. The two big differences from 50 and 30 years ago are, one, it's much stronger, and two, it's much more diverse. So it used to be a small group that was homogeneous, and it became a much wider group with a lot of different subgroups within them. And what that means, of course, is that there's a lot more argumentation going in. because the left and right have kind of spread apart a little bit. So that's kind of how it's changed over the last 30 to 50 years.
I just want to go back to what you said about politics, because that was something that jumped out to me in looking at your website and some of the past research you've done. I think that the assumption that I was under, maybe it's just the communities that I travel in, is that if modern Orthodox Jews tended to be moderate and vote Democrat, and I think in New York, certainly of a certain generation, you have a lot of people who are, let's say, legacy Democrats. They're registered Democrats, even if they haven't voted Democratic in a long time. That has changed. But your research indicated that modern Orthodox Jews are not have not become as conservative or as staunchly Republican as I suspected.
Okay, so I actually did prepare a PowerPoint. I'm glad we're doing the interview format because that's really great. I'll show you some of the political results. I will first tell you that I am a registered independent, even though no such party exists in Connecticut. I may be the only one, but I just absolutely, for reasons I won't get into today, I find myself comfortable there. My Facebook page, which I checked, says something really weird about me. It says that I'm a post-denominational traditionalist. I don't know what that means, although I wrote it, but I think it means I'm independent also. The reason I'm telling you this is because one of the things we found is that people's religious orientation, liberal, conservative, left, right, and their political orientation, liberal, left, centrist, Republican, conservative, right, do correlate very highly. So if it's okay with you, I'll show you just a few slides on the politics because this is kind of interesting. Here we go. Okay. Share. Okay, so you're seeing a page called Modern Orthodox Political Views. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, so if you read up in the media about about Jewish political views, this is Jewish. You know, the conventional wisdom is that the Jewish population is very democratic, and so these are some quotes from a Gallup poll from late last year. As we would expect, given their majority Democratic political identity, Jewish voters overwhelmingly voted for Hillary Clinton. So that's true. Remember, that's all 7 million American Jews. So one of the reasons I did the survey, because I wanted to look at the Orthodox population, okay, not just all America. I want to look at Orthodox, and then I wanted to slice the Orthodox between modern and Haredi, okay. So the first thing we found out was we did compare. I did get a bunch of non-Orthodox respondents. So this is from the survey. This is actually from a survey I did not that long ago. Who do you plan to vote for? Who do you plan to vote for in the election coming up this year? So among all non-Orthodox, not surprisingly, among all non-Orthodox, not surprisingly, it was, here we go. It was 89% Biden. 89% Biden. Among all the Orthodox, it was 54% Trump. So I don't know if that surprises you, but it doesn't surprise me that among all non-Orthodox Jews, Biden by an 8-to-1. This is across the United States. And I didn't know what to expect among the Orthodox, but you know, a slight majority among all Orthodox for Trump. So I understand that the Haredi there's a lot of them. So then if you go, what I then did was I then took the Orthodox and broke them into the two groups. And here's where you start to see a big difference. Modern Orthodox by a 2-to-1 margin is for Biden. Haredi, the Yeshivish and Hasidic, are by a 2-to-1 margin for Trump. Exactly the opposite result. So it's kind of interesting. The reason why the overall is 54% is simply because there's more of these people than there are these people. But so now for the first time, we don't have to lump all of Orthodoxy together. We see that that they are very different, and the modern Orthodox are actually midway between the non-Orthodox and the Haredi. There's a continuum. I then said, well, wouldn't it be interesting if I then took the modern Orthodox, because I asked them the question, are you left of center within modern Orthodoxy? Or do you view yourself as centrist, or are you right of center? So I gave people a chance to say, yeah, within modern Orthodoxy, I'm liberal. And I said, okay, so let's break it out. So if we then take the modern Orthodox and say, okay, for people that say, I am modern Orthodox and I'm liberal modern Orthodox, or I'm open Orthodox, 86% for Biden. Among the modern Orthodox in the center, 62% for Biden. And among the people who said, I am modern Orthodox, but I tend to be towards the right, I tend to be trending toward yeshivish, although I identify as modern Orthodox, but I tend to be to the right. So here, what we see here is that not only are the modern Orthodox and the Haredi very different, but even within modern Orthodoxy, where you are within the religious spectrum correlates with where you are in your political spectrum, which is why I say that the people who tend to be theologically, Jewishly, modern Orthodox liberal tend to be politically liberal as well, which might make sense, but now we can actually see the extent of that similarity. Just finally, by gender, not surprisingly, of course, women dislike Trump a little bit more than men. So you have an 8 percentage point difference, but this is among modern Orthodox. You have an 8% difference between men and women. Women, Biden 74%, men 66. It was interesting though that by age, we did not find much of a difference. Remember, this is modern Orthodox. So whether you're under 40 or 40 to 59 or 60 plus, they were all around 70% for Biden, 30% for Trump. This 2%, 4%, 2% difference is small. It actually is not statistically significant, which means given the sample size, you can't say that it points to a high probability that it's a true difference. So age, not big differences. Men, women, big differences. Where you are within the Jewish spectrum, Jewishly, huge differences. So that's really what kind of guides the politics.
So just one of the things that jumped out at me, and then we'll shift gears away from politics, is just the modern Orthodox in the center, the centrist Orthodox or modern Orthodox center statistic. I think the left, the fact that liberal modern Orthodox Jews tend to vote Democratic and those who are more right wing vote Republican is not as surprising to me, at least. But I was surprised by that middle number.
Yeah. So this survey. So I did a survey that was circulated through the RCA, and one rabbi complained about the results because he has always felt. I heard from two people. Two people said this is not true. Modern Orthodoxy is very Republican, very right wing. I think it depends. So look, we tend to be in shuls that are generally heterogeneous. If you're in a certain kind of shul, then I have no doubt that everybody in that shul kind of has the same views you do, whether it's left or right. In doing a survey like this, we experience the spectrum. We ask people on the left or on the right. So I suggested to the person, I said, it may be that your shul, people there have views similar to yours, which are right of center. But if you look at the spectrum, I just want you to realize that if you look at all of modern Orthodoxy, remember that it's a big tent, some of those people that are under the tent, now they may be against the wall on the left flap of that big tent. You may not agree with them, but they don't like Trump. So they disagree with you. So I tell people, don't presume and don't try to nullify the survey results based upon your own very limited experience. This was based on close to 1,000 responses. Again, the overall response, it may be that more people on the left responded to the overall survey than on the right, which might affect a number like this. But once I break it into these three categories, you clearly see the difference. And here, I've definitely isolated the groups. So you see the differences. There are definite differences. You're right, the center group, if the thinking is that centrist modern Orthodoxy is Republican, most of the audiences that I've presented this to agree that they're not. And if you look at the verbatim comments that people made, there is a fair amount of unhappiness with the current administration. in the center. Of course, there are people who are very happy, but it's a misconception to think that the center of modern Orthodoxy is conservative.
Okay, so shifting gears away from politics, but going on that big tent idea. You mentioned also that there are a variety of views about the role of women, especially expanding opportunities for women's participation in leadership and learning, in worship in some way. And certainly our shul has also, I know you mentioned your shul was one of the first young Israels, I think, to have a female president. Muriel's on the call. She was the first female president of a Orthodox shul in Cleveland. So we were also sort of pioneers in that way. How widely supported is increasing the role of women in modern Orthodoxy?
Okay, so we actually asked this question. Our current president is a woman also. We've had 4 of our last 6 presidents have been women. The National Council of Young Israel gave us a hard time. They cared about the issue then. They actually no longer do. They kind of have accepted it. So we changed the president's titles to a coordinator. And I'm very proud to say that our current coordinator has been rechristened, if I can use the word christened, as president. But this is something that, so there are several issues in society that have had a dramatic change over the last 20 years. One is the role of women. Another one is the acceptance of LGBTQ. We asked questions about both of those. So we did ask a question in our survey of 4,000 modern Orthodox Jews, and we said, should women have the opportunity for expanded roles in Jewish organizational leadership, in Torah teaching, in Torah study and scholarship, and the clergy? Should women have the opportunity for expanded roles in the modern Orthodox community, in the clergy? And across all of our responses, so for the first 3 items, for organizational leadership and Torah teaching, Torah study, about 80% agreed fully, and really about more than 90% agreed fully or somewhat. Yes, women should do all those things. Should women have the opportunity for expanded roles in the clergy? 37% agreed fully. Remember, we didn't say what that role is. And 53% agreed fully or somewhat. But, agree somewhat, on a question like this, I don't, if you agree somewhat, I'm not counting on your vote. So let's look at the 37% who agree strongly. One of the issues with women in the clergy, I'll use the term clergy, but basically functioning in the shuls, clergy role, working with the rabbi, doing things that a rabbi does. We did ask a follow-up question, which was, so you said that you agree that women should have this kind of role. Should they also be given a title of some type signifying that? Should they be given a title signifying their rabbinic authority? That's an interesting question, right? Okay. Just so you know, the 37%, so I wanted to show you this one slide. There we go. So the 37% of all modern Orthodox agreed fully that women should have a stronger role. And here's your 37%. And there it is up there. And but it was varied a little bit between men and women more than men, but both around 30 to 40%. Younger women under the age of 30, under the age of 35, more strongly. But here is where you see the huge variation. That is, as you go from the left to right within modern Orthodoxy, 85%, 60% on the left, 2/3 or more agree that women should have expanded roles, down to 6% on the right. So there definitely are differences in that regard. Oh, that's not what I want to show you. Okay. We then asked the question we then asked is, so you agreed, do you also agree that women should have some type of title signifying the rabbinic authority? overall, 19% of American modern centrist Orthodox Jews said yes, which means you could say 19% of us want women rabbis. I don't phrase it that way. What they want is they want women to have the right to be in a position in their shul, working with the rabbi as part of the rabbi staff, with a title that reflects that that's what they are. So the title doesn't reflect that they're an administrative assistant or whatever it is, some type of title. So 19% agreed. So that's really, now if you go back, that 19% varies enormously across the spectrum of modern Orthodoxy. When I talk about the large tent and the fragmentation, I spoke in the Tivot Shalom, right? Your former shul rabbi. Had a very nice visit there with Rabbi Kaplowitz, I think is the rabbi. And we talked a lot about fragmentation. They were very interested in that. And I said, you know, if you look at the role of women, that is the number one issue where there's disagreement, and there's huge disagreement. When you have one large group where 4% agree, and in the group at the other end where 84% agree, you know, that's a pretty big gap. That's a pretty big gap. So yeah, that is an issue. Over time, I think clearly over time, it's an issue that continues to evolve. I will tell you this, when we did the survey in 2016 of why people leave Orthodoxy, and we got responses from 240 people who grew up modern Orthodox, and among women, the number one reason why they left modern Orthodoxy by a very, very wide margin was the role of women. It really bothers the women. Didn't bother the men. So I think the men maybe need to become more involved, but the women, it really is a factor to them. So this is definitely an issue that is changing. I'll also tell you while I'm talking about this, the other issue that, you know, I mentioned the acceptance of LGBTQ. So we asked the question, how do you feel about your shul accepting gay individuals as members of your shul? And overall, across all of modern Orthodoxy, I was surprised that 58% supported, which is pretty high. This is the other major societal trend in secular society that's had a huge change of views. There are actually three. There's the role of women, acceptance of LGBTQ, and of course, racism, which we're living through today. But this trend of accepting and giving rights to LGBTQ has really taken off in secular society. And if you ask the question, do things that happen in the secular world affect the Orthodox world? This kind of shows it does. We did not ask this question 20 years ago, but I have no doubt that had we asked this 20 years ago, the number supporting gays being allowed as members of the shul would be nowhere near 58%. And look, even among the most right-leaning group, people who say, I am right-leaning centrist Orthodox tending toward yeshivish, because that's the wording we used, 24% support. They're not just okay with it, they support their shul accepting LGBTQ as members. So here you also see kind of a wide spectrum of beliefs. So this is another area where there's somewhat of a difference of opinion across the spectrum of modern Orthodoxy.
It's interesting. You see a wide spectrum, but it seems like it's actually, there's more consensus about the acceptance of having LGBTQ members.
Yeah.
Sense that is, and there is of expanding the roles for women in leadership. Yeah,
and maybe part of that is the don't ask, don't tell philosophy that, you know, the person is entitled to be in the shul and can get an aliyah, and we don't recognize it explicitly, but if you have a woman giving the sermon, then that's kind of a little bit more a statement. That's a more positive statement, as opposed to accepting a gay person is a statement as well, but it's not a statement that's super explicit. It could be a more implicit view of your acceptance than an explicit view, if that makes sense.
It's very interesting to keep in mind. I'm gonna ask one more question that is going to be a long question, but anyone who wants to ask something, if you want to take this opportunity to put it into the chat, then we can get to some questions from everyone who's listening in. So my last question is, how satisfied are people with modern Orthodox institutions, with their shuls, with their schools? I'm always interested how satisfied are people with their rabbis. And I know you did a study recently related to how the community was responding to COVID. Has COVID changed that? Do people feel the community has responded well in the face of the COVID pandemic?
Okay, so shuls, let's start with shuls. I will tell you that when we ask people, what things in your Orthodox observant, what are the things that give you the most joy and satisfaction as a modern Orthodox observant Jew? The number one thing by a very wide margin was sense of community. People love the community, they love the shul. Not everybody loves tefillah, but people love the shul and being with people of like-minded values. You know, the specifics of shul, you know, people, I can bring it up now if you want, as far as there are generally positive views about their shul's acceptance of their views, about the rabbis being responsive. If you go back to my 2017 broad survey, there is actually a long section on shuls where we ask people a whole bunch of questions. So I would say generally positive. People go to shul, a very high percentage go to shul on Shabbat, much fewer during the week. But the shul is viewed as a center of the community, and people like the shuls. People generally like the rabbis. The one question, we asked a few questions about rabbis. The rabbis' views, decisions reflect the views of the people. Does he listen? And I can bring that up if you want. But I'll share with you the general view that people value the shuls. In the survey on the coronavirus, which we did in May, we found that the shuls are dealing with it. 2/3 of modern Orthodox shuls have online tefillah, davening, and 95% of online learning. People are going to these things and they're generally pretty satisfied. We asked a couple of questions. One, we asked, have your views on the importance of a shul changed? And that's a question that my rabbi actually suggested we ask. And he was one of the people I went to for questions. And because rabbis are recognizing that people's behaviors are changing. And people tell us, a very, very strong majority say, no, my views on the importance of my shul have not changed. A small number said, I see shuls as less important, but many, many more said, no, I see the shul now as even more important. People did say that, yeah, because of Zoom, I've expanded my outreach. I am now going to classes given by shuls outside my community. So maybe there'll be competition. But the views of shuls are very positive. I will also say this, I have gone to the websites of 250 shuls, and modern Orthodox shuls. It's just a huge, huge diversity. Every now and then somebody calls me and says, I'm not happy with my shul. Can you give me advice on a shul I'd be happier with? And I tell them, listen, if you're willing to move, I can guarantee you that you will find a shul that you will love if you're willing to move. Because there's such a variety of shuls and rabbis and philosophies. And you can capture this just by looking at the photos of the shuls and seeing the people. So people in general like their shuls. You asked about day schools. So about 83% of modern Orthodox send their kids to an Orthodox Jewish day school, but another 7 or 8% send them to a Jewish community school. So between the two, you've got 90% sending their kids to an Orthodox, to a Jewish school. We did ask a question in the survey we did in late 2019. We asked them the following statement. At some point in the future, I might consider sending my children to public school. Agree or disagree? Agree, strongly agree, somewhat agree. If you combine so about 15% agreed with that, but another 15% somewhat agreed with it. You know, so that 15% that agree kind of tracks with the 15% that are already not sending their kids to an Orthodox school. And maybe it means that another 15%, if things get really bad, if they're not happy with continuation of virtual learning, if the cost becomes even more of a burden, that's kind of the risk of people taking their kids out of the Orthodox schools. There is a challenge. We did ask people, we listed 27 items and said, is this a problem for the community? Is this a problem for the modern Orthodox community? Of those 27 items, the cost of Orthodox Jewish day school education was number one by a very, very wide margin. So that is a problem. You also asked about the coronavirus, and we have that survey. All these surveys are online. I'm going to show you the very last slide, which has my web link. You can get all that stuff online. That survey covered a lot of ground, but I'll just share with you one question we asked. So the Pew survey asked the question, has the coronavirus experience affected your faith? And they came out with a report back in April. It said the group that has had a negative impact on their faith is Judaism. And then the fellow in the writer for the Jewish Telegraphic Agency was smart enough to comment. He said, well, that's not really the way we talk about it. That's kind of a Christian language, your faith. Has it affected your faith? So I decided to ask a question. Have your experiences during the coronavirus pandemic affected you Jewishly? Not going to define it any more than that. Has it affected you Jewishly? And the vast majority, about 2/3, said no. About 10 or 15% said yes, somewhat, of mixed feelings. Only a few people said it's affected them negatively, under 10%. And about 20% said, yeah, my Jewish feelings are strengthened. What I found most interesting is that when we asked this question to the Haredi, the Yeshivish, the Hasidic, the Haredi group, close to 40% said, yeah, it's affected me Jewishly. My Jewish feelings have been strengthened. And I would have to read through their comments to why, but you can kind of understand why a group that lives in very close proximity, a very tightly knit community that's been through some serious bad times, a community that really is known for its strong community and togetherness, and a community that's based in very strong, largely unquestioning faith. You can understand why some of that people might say, yeah, I actually feel stronger now than I did before, even though my father or somebody has died. So I did. So but the coronavirus has had many impacts. We cover it in our report. The Haredi group also is the group that's been most affected by the incidence of coronavirus and financially as well. The other thing I'll say is that we asked people, do you feel isolated? And a lot of people, 20% feel very isolated, and 60% feel very or somewhat isolated. Remember, the community is so important. And now you have, the most important thing is a sense of community. And now you have 60% of modern Orthodox Jews saying, I feel very isolated. How is that going to play out? If this continues for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, how will it play out? So it's interesting to kind of think about that.
That is, I think, the major challenge that I know all shuls and rabbis are really grappling with and thinking about is how do you reach out to people, make them feel less isolated?
Right, very much so.
Just to start with the first question I have, and please send in, keep sending in your questions. Someone asked that you said that 40% of modern Orthodox Jews were choser b'tshuva. They were balei tshuva. They didn't grow up religious. How does that percentage differ by age group? And how does membership in the different subgroups of modern Orthodoxy differ by age?
So first of all, in the different subgroups, while we found 40% of modern Orthodox to be balei tshuva, we also found 30% of the Haredi to be balei tshuva, choser b'tshuva, among the Yeshivish and Hasidic. Part of that is the fact that people are moving back and forth. They're picking and choosing where they want to be within Orthodoxy. So it is actually not at all uncommon for someone to be a conservative Jew, to grow up in kind of a traditional conservative household with Shabbat, kashrut, to whatever extent they feel comfortable, and to be attracted to modern Orthodoxy because it's the closest theologically to traditional right-wing conservatism. But it's also very common for those people to, after some period of time, to move on to become yeshivish, often yeshivish, sometimes Hasidic, but there's a lot of back and forth. In terms of the age, it's hard to say. The way we asked the question, it would be hard to to get an understanding of the differences by age. I will tell you this, and that is, I will show you one slide, which I found. This is a slide that I first saw in the Pew survey of 2013. I'll just show it to you because I think it kind of blew my mind when I saw it. Here we go. They have a table called Orthodox retention by age. So what they're saying is, if you were raised Orthodox, here we go. Okay, if you were raised Orthodox and you're currently ages 18 to 29, there's an 83% chance you're still Orthodox. So this is somebody who's like 18, somebody who today is 18 to 29. They were raised in Orthodox, and 83% of them are still Orthodox. But look what happens by the ages as you get older. Among those ages 30 to 49, by the time people are 50, among people who are raised Orthodox, most of them are no longer Orthodox. And by the time people are 65 plus, my age, only 22% are still Orthodox. Okay, so those were different times. You're talking about people here who were raised in the 1940s and 50s. Those were different times. What I learned from this is that there are retention problems, and people do kind of move back and forth between the various subgroups. I can't tell you I can dig into the numbers, but I can tell you that 40% of all modern Orthodox are Baalei Tshuva. It is lower at the older ages. It is lower. It's higher among the younger, but what the actual numbers are, I don't know offhand. But I did want to show you this because this kind of reinforces the understanding that people are moving back and forth a lot. Can I show you this slide? And I'm showing you this because you titled the talk something about sliding to the right or drifting to the left. I thought this was an interesting question. We asked people who identified as modern Orthodox, has your personal level of religious observance changed over the past 10 years? Everyone says, oh, modern Orthodoxy, it's moving to the right. Everyone's moving to the right. People are becoming more from chumrot, stringencies, enough of that. At the same time, people are saying, oh my God, people are moving to the left and going off the derech and becoming not from. Well, which is it? Or is it both? So it's interesting to see that 23% of people told us that they've become less observant over the 10 years, and 39% have become more observant. So I would say there has been a shift to the right. If you sense it in the community, it's probably true. There has been a shift to the right. Don't forget that some of these people have moved on and are now part of the Haredi group. And some of these people have moved on and now no longer identify as Orthodox, but there is definitely there's a slide to the right. Yeah, there is a slide to the right. It's a slide because people gradually become more observant. I did want to comment on the word drifting to the left because it's not really drifting. I think a lot of it is people. Many of the people who go off the derech, who leave Orthodoxy, do so because they observed something in the community that they didn't like, or they had questions that were not asked. So in many cases, it was a traumatic experience. So but in terms of the title of the overall talk about sliding to the right and drifting to the left, again, here we have another slide that shows that people are moving in every direction. So yeah.
And do you have a sense, I think that the second part of that question was, do you have a sense of what segment of modern Orthodoxy is growing? What is the younger demographic of modern Orthodoxy? Is it on the left, the center, or the right?
Yeah, so I think the younger demographic is moving to the right. For one reason, the younger demographic does have an attrition problem to the left, where people are becoming non-Orthodox. We don't know what the number is. I saw one very informal survey which suggested that if you were a graduate of an Orthodox Jewish high school 10 or 15 years ago, somewhere between 20 and 30% are no longer observant. There's more learning going on. I think in general, the younger modern Orthodox community is kind of sliding to the right, and the people at an older ages. Okay, in the Middle Ages, in the 35, 40, 45, there is a lot of stress because of the cost of Orthodox Jewish day schools. That question about how important to you is your Orthodox Jewish observance. Remember, we had 75% said, yeah, it's a very important. The one group that had a lower number was men ages like 35 to 50. I don't know why that is. We didn't ask. I have my own theory that you're talking about a group that's under stress, under financial stress. That's part of it. As people get older, at ages 60, 65, 70, there's a huge increase in Torah learning, in going to shul, and feeling connected among the elderly. And at the same time, there's a fair number of people who are modern Orthodox who are sliding into the yeshivish world. So there's a lot of dynamic change. This, by the way, is the cover. Just so you know, I did prepare a PowerPoint. There are slides in here that we didn't talk about because I love the interview format, Rabbi, which I think is really great. But I did prepare the PowerPoint, and if anybody who wants it, I'll tell you how to email me, and I'll be happy to send it to you.
And maybe if you email it to me, I will include it also in our weekly newsletter, so people can find it there as well.
I will email it. I'll email it to you. You know what? I can put this online and just send you a link, a very simple link.
Perfect. So it's about 9:20. So we've been talking now for about an hour. If there aren't more questions, I'll unmute everyone so people can say hello. But thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your research and your insight with us. It really just strikes me about how much the big tent that is modern Orthodoxy, as well as the importance of really creating a home for people and allowing people to find their niche. Because I think that it's when people struggle to find a spiritual home in their community that sometimes they drift away or move in another direction. So I find it very very powerful to see these numbers and think about what we can do as a community to help people feel connected and meaning in their lives and in their Torah learning. So thank you so much for being with us tonight.
My pleasure.
Let me unmute everyone if I can. Okay. So now you can unmute yourselves. I'm just going to turn off the recording.